We're here.
Is this thing on?
This thing is on. It's on, man.
Hi, everybody. You are listening to Kids in the Hops. I'm Chris Davis, the head brewer from Muddy Creek Brewing.
And I'm Jason Hands, the head brewer from Butte Brewing.
Today, we're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about Saisons.
Saisons.
Yeah, this is something that we decided we were going to do a while ago, but never actually got around to it. And last time we met, we talked about Pilsner.
The German
Pilsens. And so then I suggested, hey, let's do Saisons this time around.
That's right, because we forgot, because the idea was that we were going to choose the next episode at the end of each episode for the show. Yep. And then I said to Chris, I was like, oh man, we didn't get the show last night. No. And he's like, let's do a Saison. It's like, awesome. But what I've decided, what I've found out through researching Saisons, it's not as not fulfilling, but it's not going to be as, like, we ran out of time last time because there's so many avenues to go down. So we really had to stretch this.
Well, I'll agree with you to an extent, but
nice.
But
you're hopeful.
But
I like
kind of disagree with you as well. But no, because like there's a lot of what we were talking right now. There's a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to Saisons. So. And there are books, and I was looking into some books on Saison, but yeah, it could be a very simple, cut and dry. It could be a 5-minute thing.
It could be a 5-minute show.
Or it could be, like an entire series. It could be.
Right.
But we don't have that information to make a 5-day show.
Well, but what would be cool is if you brewed it several different ways. So if you do like a home project, if we just did like a Kids in the Hops home brewing video, and we did like a series because it's pretty cool. So anyways, I don't want to get into with the spoilers right now, but
so Saisons, we're going to be doing that.
Saisons.
And then it's also Valentine's Day is coming up day after tomorrow. And if you're into that sort of thing,
if you're into hugging and kissing.
I'm not a huge Hallmark Valentine's Day sort of guy, but
you don't pay $5 for a card, and you don't pay $37 for a thing of roses.
What?
Wow!
I know. You know why?
Because you're not married.
Because I really don't love her.
Because she doesn't matter. Daffodils and dandelions. Yeah. How you been, man?
I've been good. Busy. Work's been busy. Work's been stressful.
That sounds like you're whining.
No, I just keep breaking things, and that's my problem. If I would just stop breaking my equipment, then I could brew like I'm supposed to do.
It sounds like your company could survive if you just stopped coming into work. You just go somewhere else.
Sometimes I wonder. Yeah. The world's better off without me. Thanks, Jason. Yeah.
Hey, it's all about perspective.
But no, I've been good. I'm just busy working on some stuff. We've got a lot of Brewfest coming up. We'll talk about that later. We've got the Peaburg Brewfest coming up. What? And
no spoilers, man. But this is the season coming up, so we were actually just discussing that. Yeah. So you had suggested that we do Saisons, and you had suggested that we do love songs.
I did, yeah, because it's we've got
it's a time for love.
Punkers are if they're not known for being. I think punks are known for 3 things.
Rude.
Well, yeah, that's the finger to the government, the anti-establishment. I'll do things my way, but then I also think that there's also then the happy-go-lucky, just kind of sophomoric, just stupid humor. Right. And then I think if anything, punkers are usually they're romantic. So I said. We've got St. Patrick.
There's a passion.
We've got St. Patrick's Valentine's Day coming up. So I said, let's do some punk rock love songs and a little mix of yay, we're in love and I'm happy, and then also, oh, we broke up and I hate you.
I hate you.
Yeah. So.
Oh man. Well, then I think we definitely had to play "I'm the One" from the Descendants.
Yes.
Right, because that's that was the big thing. I'm the one, but you spend your time with that guy.
Yeah. And that's like, that was one of the songs that turned me off to the Descendants.
Sure.
It was that Milo Goes to College, I think, was that album.
I think so.
And it just kind of, I couldn't get behind his voice and kind of the whininess of it, but then it's also one of those songs that I'm always singing along when it's like,
right.
And halfway through you're like, oh yeah, I actually do like this song.
Well, if you go and you listen to the rest of the songs on that album, completely different than that song.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, if that's their feel, if that's their tone, man, they probably have so many better songs. No, the rest of it's like, S word. It's like, you're not radio friendly.
I think, they're not really. I think that Marriage is on that.
True love.
That's Marriage. That's on my playlist. That is also off of Milo Goes to College. So we might listen to that a little bit later.
Well, hopefully.
So we've got Saisons. We've got some Punkin' Not in Love songs. What else are we going to talk about?
Beer and punk, I think, is what we talk about mostly.
Well, yeah.
So we were going to talk about the Brewfest all coming up.
Brewfest.
Because I think our first one for me, comes up on Saturday. And then which you are going to be there too, but I don't know. Was that your first? No, because you just did one in town.
Well, we were there, yeah.
You weren't.
I was
brewery
working,
was.
But yeah, the brewery was there.
Yeah.
And like Lewis and Clark and Thirsty Street. This was the one that was held at the depot the day before Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl party. And then the pho. There was the pho truck, the Hungry Squirrel.
Yeah, I guess they were there too, yeah.
Yeah, so and that's something else I want to make a shout out, because they're going to be doing their thing on Saturday. That we're not going to be here.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They're
going to be doing their thing here. And
Butte loves pho.
More pho for you.
I posted something today on Facebook. I was like, this is why I miss the old stomping grounds of Fairfax, Virginia.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's because it's like 30 furries. I call them furries. 30 pho restaurants all in the proximity within. Right? Why not? Anyways, hopefully I hit up so many different groups today. Hopefully people are listening to us. So all you beer nerds out there, we will be getting a beer. And all you punk nerds, I hit up your sites too. So hopefully we get a lot of feedback. So I got my nerdy KBMF DJs out there. Hopefully someone's streaming as well and can tell me what the stream number is, because I can't really look that up for some reason. I can see who's streaming what right now, but I want 1,000 streamers. Let's get 1,000 streamers going on right now. All right, well, let's go to some music. We'll come back around and we'll begin our tale of Saison, and we'll probably start in the region of Wallonia of southern Belgium.
Yes.
It's gonna be nonsense. All right, let's set the tone. Oh, you know what?
No.
You better know what. I wanted to pull up the Wallonia national anthem.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So
keep talking.
That's a great, yeah. This
Bobby time.
So as we said earlier, one of the reasons why we're doing this show is we're doing a Saison episode. We're profiling the Saison beer, and the Saison beer just happened to originate in Wallonia. So what you're listening to now is the national.
This is the national anthem, this is the anthem of Wallonia, which is the southern part of Belgium.
Yes.
And so why that's interesting is that the whole topic of tonight is Saison, and I think that Saison and Bière de Garde, as we'll kind of loosely talk about too, because that's a French thing, and since our really the show should have been about farmhouse. We should have just said it's farmhouse ales. We probably could have gone to every nation, because Saison just happens to have. I'm going to romanticize it. It's like, it's a style. It's Saison, but it's still in the Belgium category. But anyways,
and I always thought it was French.
Sure, because the word is French.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, so it's like, but it's kind of. it has a dual identity because it is a Belgian ale by geography.
By geography, kind of like a German Pils and the Bohemian Pils. A Bohemian Pils is by region, right? So, anyways, it is. It's a Belgian beer, and there's the funk involved. So that's only a minute. That's only a minute 40. That's how long your anthem is when your soccer team's playing against the other team. It's like, now stand and rise for this 1 minute long anthem. Anyways, Valonia.
So we're talking about Saisons.
Yes.
Valonia is a region of southern Belgium. And for those of you that don't know, because we didn't know until we looked at a map, admittedly, Belgium is just north of France. So it is the northern country to France. So what happened was that it just so happened that in Valonia, there's a large German or a large French
and a minority of German speaking. So so it's a large.
So it's a Belgian country or a province of Belgium, but it just happens to have a lot of French people that live there and contribute to the country.
I'm going to guess, looking back on the history of it and the politics, that they just, hey, you. Oh, there goes the Grand Puma. When they joined. So at the time, it was probably like a large portion of France and French people, but all of a sudden they were like building out the political boundaries.
Sure.
Yeah, same thing with the Czech Republic.
The people were there. I mean, it makes sense that there would be a little bit of cross-contamination between borders. So yeah.
Like a sour cross-contamination.
Right.
What's this? I don't know about this. So Valonia at the time is in it's a certain section. It looks like in this certain of southern Belgium, up in the northwest, is where of a province.
The northwest southern region of Belgium.
Northwest of southern Belgium. Well, because that's not the whole thing of Belgium,
yeah,
right?
I know.
Right.
So anyway, southern Belgium.
Which seems that Belgium is still bigger than Ireland. Goodness gracious. And England. Okay. The Great Britannia. So you have the southern region. It's known for its iron, its coal production, and at one point it's like the capital of production of the industry. And you have a large amount of farmland, because anytime you have a big capital burst and there's money involved, there's always going to be the workers. Hence, Saison. So you have Belgium, and this certain area is very famous for its farmland, and they're bringing in foreigners from all over to work these farmlands.
So you're talking post-industrial revolution.
Yes. That's 17th century.
That has spurred on a lot of commerce.
Yep.
and a lot of industry in the area, but because of that, you're also going to need a lot of people coming in and working the farms to support people that are coming in and that are working in the factories. Right. So in order to do that, you get in farm labor, you get these migrant workers that come in.
And they were referred to as saisonniers.
Saisonniers, yes. Right. So what happens is the farmer in this particular style of beer, the farmer would be brewing the beer as the seasons start to change and as things start to cool down. We were talking anywhere from September to November is generally when these beers were to be brewed.
Quote unquote winter.
Yes.
But late fall, early spring. We cold seasons.
Exactly. As things started to cool down. And the reason why you wanted to brew this beer as the seasons were cooling is because that makes it easier to control fermentation. So if you're fermenting in the summer months when it's really hot out, you really don't have a way to control your fermentation temperatures. But as things start to cool, you have a lot more flexibility. You can bring your beer inside, you can leave it outside, whatever. You can make it, you can control your fermentation temperatures much easier. So what they were doing is they were brewing these beers and then letting them age throughout the winter. And then as the spring and summertime came to be, when they had these migrant workers, this was a lot of times this was beer for the staff.
Right. So you had all throughout the year, I mean, farmlands, because this is still during the time of people not understanding what was making you sick from drinking the water.
True.
So if you look back,
and before pasteurization,
right,
and before they even realized what yeast was contributing to beer.
Right, because I think wasn't it the scientist Pasteur?
Pasteur, yeah.
He's the one that discovered what was happening and what was in the beer. Because at that point, everyone was drinking it, but then people were getting sick from beer, or maybe not sick from beer, but beer was tasting weird, and they're like, "Well, why does it sometimes go from good to bad?" And he figured it out. So with Saison, you didn't really. That's not something you acknowledged. You just drank what was given to you because at that time period you knew it was good to drink. So all throughout the year, in these farms, they were brewing as they were working and they were producing. So because as a farmer, you had a wife, you had a grandfather, you had a father, you had the in-laws, you had all the cousins, you had the family, whomever was involved. They needed something to drink. So you had different levels of beer. And so you had different ABV. So like the younger kids probably had somewhere in the ballpark of like a 1% to 2% beer because it's the runoffs and it's the small beers. And then that's a whole different category because you can do a substitute on English beers. And they are the ones that are really famous for their second run-ins. Okay. So to stay on point, all throughout the year, they're brewing beer. And they're doing it so everyone can survive. But at the same time, at the winter months, you had not a lot of work for your workers that were there for seasons. So I don't get that. It seems like if they were seasoners, they weren't really seasoners. They were year-rounders.
Well, I would argue that you had
left.
You probably that's why they're called migrant workers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're there, they're working, and then they're like, all right, well, we're gonna leave, and the rest of the right. But the
avocado season's over, yo. We're out of here.
Peace. so and avocados in Belgium. I love it.
You're welcome.
Because when I think guacamole, I think Saison, and I think Belgian triple. So So
you haven't lived.
You're right. No. So you have the workers, they're doing the thing, and then they leave. Then the farmers that have nothing to do, they start to brew. And they're brewing for 3 reasons I was reading about. One reason is you brew because there's not much else to do.
Sure. Plus there's gambling debts.
There's just life debts. It's spacing me the second reason. Third reason is, the second reason is the main reason. The main reason is to have quaffable, a mixture of beer for your workers while they're working throughout your summer season. Yep. The third is so you have spent grain for food for the livestock. So I don't know. I'm looking at you, but those were 3 of the reasons that I read in that book, the Oxford Companion, where I keep finding errors. Finally, they're like, just contact them. Quit messing with me on Facebook. So, anyways, oh no, I think we need to change that song because that's just. It's all misfits. This is just, it's background talk, right? Because that's how we need in the world. Is
better be careful.
That's so. But okay, now you go. I don't know.
No, I think this is what they what they claim to be is a style that originated late 1700s, and then, but there's really
17th century,
1700s.
No, 1700. Yes,
1700s.
Yes, sorry.
1700s. So it basically started in the 1700s. They were brewing it in the later months, while the fermentation temperature was easier to manipulate and control. They'd brew up a bunch of beer and let it age very nicely in the cooler temperatures. And then come springtime and summer, the beer was ready for their workers to consume. And what did you say? It was 6 quarts or 6 liters?
5 liters.
5 liters was their allotment, was your standard allotment as a worker. So
a day.
Per day. So what we were talking about earlier is that you need that beer to be a little stronger in alcohol content when you brew it, because it helps with the aging process. The stronger the alcohol content in the beer, the more antimicrobial characteristics you're going to see. They were semi to moderately hopped, which hops also have antimicrobial and preservative characteristics to them, so there was a reason for that as well. But they were also, and this is the thing where we keep going back and forth, and we really don't have the answer, is that they were farmhouse ales. So you would assume that there's going to be some wild yeast in there. There's going to be some souring.
Yes.
And there's going to be a tartness factor to this beer. If you're speaking just based on what they had at their disposal, there's probably no way they can get around brewing a beer that's going to be, have some tartness to it. However, modern renditions of the Saison are nothing like that.
No. So we have no proof of what the beers tasted like before around 1950 because of DuPont, who we'll go into as well a little later. So when these breweries, but not breweries, when these farmhouses, and they were scattered, so there's always these little farmhouses. They're all brewing their own stuff.
Yeah, they were just brewing for themselves.
Themselves, and maybe for like friends and family. So no one really knew. It wasn't really a style. It was just people that were producing a livelihood, something to support these workers and their family. So,
well, they're not going to go down to the store and get it.
No,
So I mean, that's like, but that was the thing. Like, we all drink beer. We're at a point we're all at a point where it's safer to drink beer than it is regular water, and they didn't know why initially.
Right. But then that was worldwide. Yeah. That was a situation worldwide where people were just getting sick and they didn't realize. But we've survived so long, so I don't understand. There's a certain point. But if we track the origins of wine, liquor, beer, mead, blah blah blah, it all goes back. Like, there's the Finnish farmhouse beer, Sati.
Oh yeah,
I think is how you say that.
Yeah.
So we should have just done a farmhouse thing, because beer de garde from France.
Well, we can.
We can turn that into it, but we didn't read about the Sati. But I think that's more like ceremonial.
I think
like weddings.
Dogfish Head did a Sati.
They did.
Yeah,
they also did the honeymoon African. But I've also heard other people say, like, well, honeymoon means this, and this is from this culture. It's like, well, anyways.
Yeah.
So as these farms with farm rotation as well, it was never the same.
Yeah, exactly.
It was never the same.
Yeah.
And so you'd have
and they were
rye,
just brewing
spelt.
beer. They didn't know they were brewing a style. So
right.
no true styles were really developed. It was kind of all right.
Right.
Yeah. So like, Bob's over here, the farm over there. It's
and they weren't brewers.
No, they were just, they're just
right
making provisions for the farm and the family and the workers, just like they were baking bread or
right.
curing meat. It was just part of, like, I think most people just knew how to brew beer. And or roughly speaking. And back then, most beers were soured to an extent. So it's like, oh my God, did you check out Vlad's beer over there?
That was the worst.
Soured. Can you believe he did that?
He really let that go.
Yeah, it was just like, yeah, whatever. That's the way beer is right now. So they don't know.
They just accepted it.
But the transition from that type of a beer to the beer that we know as Saison now, and how that happened is really that's where we're coming up.
That's the digging. Next segment,
yeah.
Right? And that really is, and I think that was also an accident, because we'll go into that. But when I first learned about Saisons, I just lumped it in Belgian categories. And then that's something else, is that we could have just lumped Saison under Belgian categories, but that would have been so big for you to take the history of Belgian and the Trappist brewing and World War II and just all the stuff that just they all encountered as monks. It's just different. That's just a different category.
There's a lot of splinter stories.
There's a lot of splinter stories.
Yeah.
And right. And so with Saison, the takeaway for me for the most part is that that was what's their names? See, we have a window here in the studio and I see these folks.
Squirrel.
What? Do you like beer? Come in the studio. So I forgot the other part about with the Saison, people were brewing this all throughout that whole region, and that's just what they called the beer. But they didn't probably have a name for it. It's just like, hey, worker, you're out there milking the cows. Here's more beer for you. Yeah. But it didn't probably become Saison until. How do you acknowledge that? It's like, well, you guys brew beer. Yeah, we brew it for our seasonal workers. So you guys have any commercial breweries out in your land? No, just farmhouse breweries.
So what I'm wondering is did somebody come in and say, hey, this is a beer that's made in this region. We're going to, what were they drinking in the pub at the time?
Were there pubs?
I don't know.
And if they were, it's probably all exports, because it was time.
At the beginning of the show, you're like, "Whoa, this is so easy. This is such a," and it could be, but
you're adding the splinters.
You're
the thorn in the side, because you're adding the splinters.
I'm just saying, it's got to come from somewhere. So, I mean, how could they not have pubs in the 1700s? Like, seriously, there were pubs. There had to be.
There had to be.
Yeah,
because that would have branched over throughout all that area. So they're drinking. What are they drinking? Because at that time period, what was available at the 17 from nothing from France, because France was beer to guard.
You've had 2 weeks. You've had 2 weeks to research.
I also have other things going on. Oh. Well, because that wasn't the subject. Not what are you drinking in? Because isn't that one of the things that this is what would spawn a demand for there to be a local pub? Because if there was a local pub, they're selling obviously Belgian beers that are brewed by monks. That's what they're drinking. That's your answer. They're drinking doubles. They're drinking triples. They're whatever. Because then information is lost on that as well, because of the war and all the wars and all the things that took place. Because the 100 Years' War, and Belgium was involved in all that. So all those styles, because their monasteries were ransacked for material for all that stuff. They took their kettles, they melted them down for bullets.
Yep.
So at that time period, you had Belgian beer, but the yeast is so distinct. Like Ardenn's, that's a huge thing, and that's a different subject, because I'm not ready to go into that subject, because the Ardenn's yeast is significant with different beer. So if Saison, if the farmers weren't that worried about going into the local towns or cities for beer because they were on their farms, they didn't care. And when they're in town, they probably just drink whatever beer they could get. And
sure.
So, but yeah, they had to have something. But they weren't brewers. I
know, but what I'm saying is that, was it... So if the locals are drinking Belgian ales because they're in Belgium, I would assume that's the case. And then you've got this segment of farmers that are brewing that are French,
right?
Wine, and they're
Lots
brewing these beers. How did it go from the farmhouse to the tap house? That's what I'm asking.
That's what we're coming up to. That's what we're coming up to because we're going to come to DuPont.
Exactly.
Because that's exactly. So you
bringing Saison to the masses via a large brewery. Do you want to talk about that here in a second, or
this category of beer? I just almost it's interesting to me because I would just lump it in Belgians, and that's what I've always done my whole beer career. I've just said Saisons or Belgians, and I put that in the category of triples, doubles, blondes. Like that's just in Saisons. It's like the fourth category of Belgian.
Okay.
And it's because you can brew a beer with any Belgian yeast. That's what I would say. Here we go. So, what was the yeast strain then? Up until a certain point. So to a certain point, they would just brew the beer. And this is kind of like the, I don't know, Grand Poobah knows the term for the corn beer of South African, when they went to go visit the Zulus, that they would make this cornmeal. And the way they produced it, it sounds to me it was a wild ale. They would just mash it.
Open fermentation.
And whatever, go. So to me, that it seems like Saison is traditionally the sour, quote unquote. I'm doing finger quotations. What have we told you about finger quotations? Not to do them. And then you had the other three that were a little bit more controlled. So with this subject, if we don't really have a pre-DuPont brewery analysis of the process, I almost assume that it's the same thing with these other four styles of Belgian beers.
I would imagine, yeah.
Right.
So I would say so.
At a certain point, they discovered that there was yeast management was important.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Saison is just an uncommercial regional beer that started off as a sour or a wild, and every now and then was probably really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like they probably hit it every now and then.
Sure.
And it was just like, man, this is really good. And I'm guessing that so I don't know. So it's interesting. So because when you go to the problem with brewing is that you're trying to hit consistency. Commercial brewing is consistency. Home brewing is consistency.
Yeah.
I disagree.
I agree and I disagree. I mean, yeah, to an extent, but there are, and these are the brewers that I admire, and these are the brewers that they just brew and. Right. And they don't have like, oh, we've got this flagship core amount of like, oh, we've got 10 beers and they just have to be absolutely, completely the same every single time. That's the only way we're going to make money. I just completely disagree with that outlook. And because I'm constantly, and I drive my bosses crazy because I'm constantly like, well, what about this?
Right.
Well, what if we did a little bit of this and a little bit, and I'm always successful when I do that.
Right.
But it's not always the same beer.
Sure. No.
And it's not
100%.
meant to be. That's why I change things. And and I want to see, and sometimes I change something and I'm like, well, that's not what I was looking for. So we'll go back to the original and then we'll, deviate from there. Yes, I agree on principle. You get to a point where you're like, somebody came in and started developing this beer commercially, and at that point you want to be known for, and that's hard with a beer that has no real true identity. It's like it's an idea. Saisons are kind of an idea,
right?
They're like farmhouse ales, and that's what happens when you lend yourself to open fermentation, and whatever happens. I mean, like Ale Apothecary in Bozeman. That guy used to work for Deschutes, and and he was brewing pretty much the same beer over and over and over again, even though he was high up in the food chain. And then he was like, well, I'm gonna buy a bunch of wooden fermenters and throw a sheet over it and see what happens. And the guy's killing it. Yeah.
And that's a brewery that's in Bozeman?
Yeah. Not in Bozeman, in Bend.
Oregon. Bend. I thought you said Bozeman.
I may have.
You did.
I may have.
Okay. Yeah, you said Missoula.
Missoula.
Well, and I agree with that. I think that's what's going to be the big. I think that's my prediction for like the big movement of beer is that when you get out of categories and you're brewing, you're just brew because
this is what we have. It's beer. It's dark. There you go.
Right.
Drink it.
Right. So. Exactly. I mean, and I think that's what was happening with this time frame. Like we dated around 1759 is that when maybe historical analog was written where like this is a beer that was being designed, but if you go to the Bière de Garde that was going down in France, someone around the same time period was acknowledging it time-wise and saying like this is what's happening. These beers are mostly sour and vinous, and which has led a lot of people to believe that if you were trying to manufacture this beer and temperatures were an issue, wine yeast was most likely used. And if you look into the history of Alp yeast, which was the lagering yeast, you look at ale yeast, that I've heard tell that you could motivate the yeast to go into different temperature frames.
Yes.
So
you can
train the yeast. You can train the yeast.
Is what they were doing. They were slowly manipulating the DNA of the yeast by just doing a little degrees here and a little degree there, and they were just slowly pushing it in that direction.
Exactly. So
which is fascinating. I mean,
it's really cool.
Brewing really took off, and it really changed once pasteurization came into effect, and once they isolated yeast strains and understand yeast's importance in brewing beer, right, things just completely changed.
So then around 1920 you get the DuPont family. And this is when Saison became Saison.
Yes.
Yeah. Because they were producing, this gentleman by the name of DuPont was a farmer, and there were just farmlands everywhere, and like the whole farm brewery thing was all over the place, whatever. So at this one farm in particular, it was pretty well known for its history of producing farmhouse ales. So this guy by the name of DuPont, he buys this farmland to convince his son, who is just about to go to Canada, to become a farmer. So around 1920. So 1920 in the beer world, what was happening in America? When was Prohibition? 1930? 1913? When was the stock market crash? So just a significance, because I love hearing about what was happening. So Butte. When was Butte established? 1870? Somewhere ballpark. While that was happening, the German Pils craze was beginning. So while Butte was being established, the lager world was blowing up in Europe. So 1920, you have this guy, he's a farmer. He's got farmland, and his son's like, "Father, I'm leaving Belgium. I'm leaving Wallonia and our farmhouse ales, and I'm going to Canada, and I'm going to start a farm out there." And he says, "Don't do it." What? What's this? Oh, that's
Prohibition was 1920 to 1933.
Boom. So the same year that we had Carrie Nations that we had Carrie Nations plaguing America with her anti-beer movement, we had a gentleman buying land to keep his son home. Like the love there. He was just, stay here. and they built this brewery. Which
maybe he was being selfish. Maybe he was getting old and he just needed help, and he's like, oh, gosh.
Don't leave me like
if I have to milk that cow one more time.
One more time.
I swear.
So in 1920, he buys this farmland for his son, and he's just like, just don't leave me the way your mom did.
Right.
And his son stays back, and in 1950, we have established DuPont Brasserie.
Yeah.
So we have DuPont Brasserie that produces just amazing beer, and they only produce around 80,000 barrels a year currently. No, I'm sorry, 8,000. They only produce. My bad. Yeah. There's the difference. Yeah, they're only producing 100,000.
That's a lot of beer, right?
Not for my tummy.
Oh.
So they brew only 8,000 barrels. Ugh. We've explained to the audience before, like the barrels of how that works. So they don't produce a lot, but what they did was they put the name Saison on the map. They produced a beer called DuPont Saison Provençal or something around those lines, and they were trying to stay within the parameters of a traditional Saison. And when you say traditional, once again, that's tough.
Loose interpretation.
Yeah. And there's reason to believe that they are using a red wine yeast that can go all the way up to fermentation temperatures of 90 Fahrenheit.
Which for those of what?
Celsius. Like, they always say things in 40, Celsius. I'm like, I don't know Celsius.
Yeah, 90, like it's 40 something Celsius.
Right? So,
but what that does is by fermenting at that high temperature, you get a lot of what's called esters out of the beer, which Belgian beers and beers of that province, Belgian and French beers, are known for having those esters. So that would make sense for you to have a yeast strain that would accommodate higher fermentation temperatures. But the weird thing about that is that when they went into controlled fermentation? Because remember when we first started talking about this, the reason for brewing the beers in these colder months is to control that fermentation.
So around 1879, Spaten Brewery in Munich, right? Is that right? Because that's where the Oktoberfest in Bavaria.
Bavaria.
How do you spell that?
Right.
So, this gentleman that worked for Spaten Brewing, we got 10 minutes left. He created refrigeration. So he creates refrigeration. So it's loosely 1880. Up until that point, they had been collecting ice for their cellars. So most beers are probably done in the basement when they or whatever. But they had also started what we would call like a glycol jacketed fermenters. But to them, no, they had already been using that same system. So that's why I want to say that up until 1880, because in 1920s when he started that brewery. So yeah, so before around 1880, it wasn't as controlled as refrigeration because you can take all the ice you want. You can try to do the same method and maintaining and all that stuff.
It's a lot of work,
right?
Yeah,
but it's still going to be. There's probably still a lot of haphazard there, and your batches aren't probably going to be producing still. Like you probably had a couple great batches of beer, better so than you had been doing for centuries. Because I'm guessing that this beer just. Because, 1100s is when they were talking about, like, ale. By the time the Romans got to England, they had already found that beer was already there, and the Romans didn't want anything to do with beer for the most part. But then there's, like, the Rhine. So it's like, so they have been brewing, I'm guessing, for so long, but there was different measures of what they could do, hence brewing in the winter. Then, because I was thinking of Oktoberfest prior to...
Yeah.
Right, to 1880. So Did I go on a tangent? I think I went on a tangent there. Yeah. So the beer that was being brewed.
We're talking about controlled temperatures and how the fact that the Saison yeasts that were being used by DuPont are usually in the higher range of fermentation, where the original farmhouse version was brewed a little cooler, possibly, I would imagine.
Well, if they're brewing in the winter time, how are they?
You're brewing in the late fall and the winter time, so how are you letting that yeast get up to 80s and 90 degrees?
So then prior to 1880...
Unless you're just allowing the exothermic activity of the yeast, because I've seen that happen before. You know, like I've had a fermenter that did not have coolant going through it, that the fermentation alone jacked it up over 10 degrees.
Wow.
Just from the exothermic activity.
So then they must have had access at one point to a controlled yeast strain.
I would imagine at some point.
Some point.
Because when you make that transition from, all right, this is kind of a loosely defined style, to, all right, we're going to build a brewery and start making this, that's when you want to isolate, and that's right around that time frame is when that happens.
So in 1840, we were talking about how, what's his name, from Bavaria, took the yeast strain over to the Czech Republic. So he had already taken a controlled yeast strain. So in the 1840s...
But did he know that he took...
Yes.
Or was it just the bottoms? He knew that...
His father was already a prospective brewer that were brewing non-sour beers, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And alt beers and Kolsch's were already established.
Yeah.
And I think when we look at pale ales, like they have already been... the whole IPA craze.
For some time.
Controlled yeast... Yeah. But the Belgian and French regions, so the Belgians had Saison, the French had the Bière de Garde, but they're saying that most likely they would have not had access to controlled yeast strains. But at some point they would have had to. So in 1920, when this dude's like, hey, I'm going to buy this farm for you, son, we're going to brew beer. And then they brew the beer. He had access to that controlled yeast strain definitely by 1920.
Sure.
Because 1880, when refrigeration made it more possible for you to maintain your yeast cultures. Mm-hmm. So at what point and where did they get it? Because it was all wine. But the Belgians, because the Belgians, as we said earlier, the Belgian monks, they were obviously maintaining.
Yeah, the Trappist monks.
Yeah, the Trappist monks. So, yeah. So,
anyway.
Yeah. So, Saison, in the end, it's really just a home brewing style that has no definition in the most archaic sense. Is that people that DuPont Brewery is the quintessential Saison beer because they were the ones in the 1950s to be the first commercial success.
Yes.
At producing a Saison. So you go by
they were the first to identify it and try to make it a thing. And they did. And they've been successful at that.
So partial of that, then that's why I throw it in Belgian categories. But a Saison is essentially just a livelihood and a provision for the family of farmers at the time when water wasn't really understood and because there were so many people utilizing the waters that they polluted the waters, just like England and anywhere else.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right. So it's 7:56. You've been listening to Kids in the Hops. Chris Davis, Jason Hands, two brewers that like to talk beer. All right, man. Well, another show done.
Yeah.
It was all right.
Yeah, it was good.
Saison. What's the next show going to be about? I don't even know.
Jeez.
We'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk.
I'm kind of into this whole nitro and English cast ale thing.
Yeah.
Because the English beer movement was really cool because of what was going on with what you think about beer styles. So English beer styles are kind of neat to talk about. I don't know if we really had a chance to really talk about all that.
Yeah.
How you would combine the casks to make styles and the porters eventually.
Yeah, we haven't really discussed that.
It just seems like that's also like one of the big ones where everyone already knows about. I don't know. Anyways, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
So do you want to say goodbye to anyone? It's Valentine's Day.
No, I'm good.
All right. My wife, Jennifer, I love you. Valentine's Day is coming up, and I guess I'll buy you a couple daffodils or dandelions or whatever they sell in the stores these days.
Well, I didn't have anything to say because Valentine's Day isn't until the 14th. So
Well, I know, but it's also we also get categorized because we're like President's Day. We'll have a President's Day show, whether or not it's Kids and Hops or the Invaders. But you know what I mean? Like, but if it's like Christmas on a Friday, this would be the Christmas show. So, anyways, I don't know, whatever. So we got P-Bird Brewfest coming up soon, so that's gonna be a lot of fun. That kind of starts it off for me and Beat Brewing, but we've got more Beer Fest coming up.
yeah, there's let's see, there's some on the east side of the state up in
Sydney.
There's Sydney.
Bakken, that's in April.
You went there.
Oh, it was a blast.
I know, I hated
So
you.
fun.
I tried like mad to get my bosses to let me go, and they're like, no, they're not. Yeah.
No, we don't.
It was like the Charlie Brown. Yeah. And then you get back and you're like, oh my God, it was so much fun.